It hurts back there. Her voice cracked when she said it, not loud, not dramatic, just broken. She was hanging from a pine tree on the north slope of the Bitterroot Mountains, rope tight around her waist, arms pinned, bare feet scraping at nothing but hot summer air. One boot lay in the grass below her, the other was still on her foot. Elias Crow stood 10 yards away and didn't move. A 50-year-old mountain man, gray in his beard, rifle on his back, watching a young barefoot girl sway in the wind. From a distance, it would have looked wrong. He didn't look at her face first. He looked at the ridge, he checked the wind, he listened. The rope creaked. A hawk lifted suddenly from the tree line to the west, far off. Metal clicked once, then went quiet. Not an animal sound, a man sound. It hurts, she whispered again. Weaker now. Elias crouched low and touched the dirt. No clear tracks in the open dirt, but the grass near the fallen shoe was bent the wrong way. Someone had stood there recently, and whoever it was, they were close enough to hear her begging. He rose slowly. If this was a trap, rushing would kill them both. He moved in at last, knife already in his hand. One clean cut. The rope dropped. She fell into him hard, lighter than he expected, shaking so badly her teeth clicked. Her bare heel brushed his leg. She gasped and twisted, panic flashing in her eyes, and a small hairpin appeared in her hand. She drove it toward his chest. He caught her wrist without hurting her. Easy, he said, calm and low. She stared at him like a cornered animal. Then she sagged. It hurts back there, she said again. Shame and pain tangled together. He nodded once. He didn't ask questions. He didn't stare. He shifted slightly and took one quick look where the rope had bitten into her lower back through torn cloth. Red marks. Swelling. Nothing worse. Then his eyes dropped to her feet. One bare, one booted. He didn't linger. Just one quick look. The kind a man takes when he's seen traps before. He frowned. The boot looked wrong. Too dark at the heel. He leaned closer and sniffed. The smell hit him sharp and wrong. Not soap. Not leather oil. Sheep tallow. Heavy. Sour. And fresh enough to still shine on the leather. Someone had smeared it thick on her boot heel. Not to hurt her. To call something in. To draw something. In this heat, a bear could follow that stench for a long way off. He picked up the fallen boot from the grass. Grease thick outside. He held it up so she could see. Someone wants you eaten, he said. Her face went white. This smelled like land, like paperwork, like gold. Elias tossed the greased boot far into the brush, away from where they stood. Then he scanned the ridge again. If a man had set this, that man would want to watch. A crow called once from deeper in the trees. Too sharp, too timed. He felt it in his gut. They were not alone. Can you stand? He asked. She tried. Her legs trembled, but held. Her bare heel was scraped raw from struggling against bark. He tore a strip from an old cloth in his pack and wrapped her foot tight and simple. No fuss. No lingering. Just enough to walk. What's your name? He asked. May, she said. May Harper. Who did this? She swallowed. My brother-in-law, Vernon Cade. The name sat in the air like a gun laid on a table. Elias didn't react on the outside, but he remembered years ago, a younger man in chains, a courtroom that smelled of sweat and fear. Men like Cade didn't forgive. They'll say I killed my sister, May said quickly. He said no one would believe me. He said the woods would take care of it. Elias had seen gold claims make family disappear faster than fever. Elias looked at the rope still hanging from the branch. The knot was tight, clean, a cattleman's hitch, local work, not a drifter, not random. If Vernon Cade was behind this, the valley would close ranks. Men like him owned juries, owned deputies, owned silence. Elias had buried men for less. He looked back toward the ridge. If Cade was watching, he already knew the rope had dropped. We move now, Elias said. She hesitated. You're helping me. He met her eyes for the first time fully. If I leave you here, something else won't. That was answer enough. Before we go further, I want to be honest with you. This story's gathered, retold, and shaped with a few added details to sharpen the lesson and the meaning. The images you see are created to help the feeling land the right way. If you stay with me, leave a comment and tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you are listening from. I read more of those than you think, and it helps me find the next story worth telling. Elias picked up the rope and coiled it quickly. No reason to leave proof of survival behind. He brushed dirt over the scuffed patch where she had fallen. He checked the wind again. Still from the west. If a bear caught that scent, it would come from that direction. If a man was watching, he would be higher. Elias shifted their path downhill instead. Unpredictable. May limped beside him, jaw tight, refusing to cry. "You know him?" she asked quietly. "I know the kind," Elias replied. Behind them, something moved. Not loud, not crashing, just a branch settling where no wind touched it. Elias didn't turn his head. Turning showed fear. He kept walking, slow, steady. If Vernon Cade had been willing to hang his own kin in the mountains and smear her boot with grease like bait, then this was no simple family fight. This was something bigger, something worth murder. And now, because he had cut that rope, Elias Crow had stepped straight into it. If Cade was watching from that ridge, rifle laid across his knees, then he had just seen the one thing he didn't expect, someone choosing her, and in a valley where power answered to money and silence, helping May Harper would not mean trouble, it would mean war. And in this valley, war didn't start with gunfire, it started with who your neighbors chose to believe. So the question was simple: would a man who had left the law behind for peace be willing to pick it up again? Knowing the mountains might not forgive him twice, May Harper limped beside Elias Crow, each step uneven but stubborn. The clearing disappeared behind them, swallowed by pine and shadow, yet neither of them believed they were truly alone. Elias didn't look back. Men who looked back too often usually walked into bullets. He angled them downhill instead of up, away from the obvious ridge where a watcher would wait. May kept pace as best she could. Jaw set tight. She didn't cry. After a few hundred yards, he guided her toward an old trapper's shed, half hidden under leaning spruce limbs. It was nothing more than rough logs and a sagging roof, but it had walls and only one door. That was enough. Inside, the air smelled of old smoke and dry wood. Elias barred the door with a fallen beam and finally allowed himself a breath. May lowered herself onto an overturned crate. Wincing when her back touched wood, he handed her a tin cup of water. She drank carefully, like someone who had learned not to waste anything. "Start from the beginning," he said. She nodded slowly. "My sister died last week. They said fever, but she wasn't sick." Elias listened without interrupting. "Vernon took over the house, took the papers, told me I would sign whatever he put in front of me, but I said no." She looked down at her wrapped foot. "He said I didn't understand how things worked." Elias almost smiled at that. Men like Vernon always believed others didn't understand how things worked. "He said I was unstable," she went on. "Said I was grieving too hard. Said if I caused trouble, the sheriff would believe him." Not sheriff, Elias thought. Deputy. Men like Vernon didn't aim small. Then yesterday, May continued. He asked me to ride with him to check fence lines." She swallowed. "I should have known." Elias nodded once. "You fought," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised. Yes, he believed her. He had seen enough fear to know the difference between guilt and survival. Outside, a twig snapped. Both of them froze. Elias lifted one finger. Silent. He stepped to the narrow crack in the wall and looked through. Nothing moved, but the woods had a different kind of quiet now. The kind that meant someone had passed through not long ago. He stepped back. "If Vernon set that trap," Elias said, "he didn't ride out there alone." May's eyes widened. "He had a man with him. I never saw his face." Elias nodded. "That means at least two. And the deputy," she whispered. "Yes." He crouched near the hearth and began to pack quickly. He didn't waste motion. A coil of rope, a small tin of salt, 2 cartridges from his pouch. "Are we going to town?" she asked. Eventually, she blinked. "You're not afraid of him?" Elias looked at her in a way that made the question seem small. "I'm afraid of wasting time," he said. Fear was useful. Delay was not. He handed her a strip of jerky. She chewed slowly. "You know him." she said again, studying him more closely now. Elias sat back on his heels. I put him in a cell once, he said. Her eyes widened. For what stole cattle, Elias replied. Threatened a ranch hand who wouldn't lie for him. He got out. They always do. He didn't say the rest. Men with money came out cleaner than they went in, and men who arrested them sometimes paid later. May looked toward the door. If he sees me with you, she said carefully, he'll come after you. He already has. Elias answered. That landed between them like a stone. He stood and moved to the door. Listen to me, he said. Once we step out, you stay half a stride behind me. If I stop, you stop. If I move, you move. She nodded without hesitation. He eased the door open and scanned the trees. Still nothing visible, but something felt off. The birds were too quiet. They moved out together, slipping through brush rather than using the obvious trail. After 10 minutes, Elias saw it, a faint line of smoke far back toward the clearing. Not a forest fire, too controlled, too thin. May saw it too. He's burning the grass, she whispered. Elias nodded. Driving scent, he said. If the grease on her boot had drawn animals, that the fire would push them, or flush out anyone hiding. Vernon was not just cruel. He was patient. He wants you found, Elias said. May looked pale again. Why not just shoot me because dead girls raise questions? Elias replied. Accidents don't. They kept moving. Faster now. The shed was no longer safe. Nothing was safe. After another stretch of silent walking, May stumbled but caught herself. You don't have to do this, she said suddenly. Elias didn't slow. If I leave you, he said. He wins twice. She didn't answer that. The trees began to thin slightly ahead. Beyond them lay higher ground, and from higher ground a man could see who followed. Elias paused and listened one more time. There it was. Faint. Metal. A small click. Rifle bolt. Not close, but not far enough. He leaned closer to May without looking at her. He's watching, he murmured. Her breathing quickened. Stay steady, he said. He straightened and began walking again, as if nothing had changed. Because sometimes the best way to survive was to pretend you had not noticed. They reached the edge of a rocky rise. Elias guided her behind a thick boulder and crouched. If he wanted you dead already, he said quietly, you would be. She swallowed. So what does he want? Elias glanced toward the thin smoke in the distance. He wants you blamed. He paused. And he wants me scared. He gave a dry half smile. That part won't work. May almost laughed despite everything. Almost. Down below, somewhere in the trees, a horse shifted its weight. They were closer than Elias had hoped. He checked the wind again, still in his favor. For now, he turned to May. We head for my place, he said. Higher ground, harder to surround. And then, Elias replied, we stop running. That was the first time he had said it out loud. Stop running. War had already started the moment he cut that rope. If Vernon Cade was willing to burn grass and bait animals to erase a problem, he would not stop at threats. He would escalate. And once they reached the mountain cabin, there would be no pretending this was a misunderstanding. Before we climb higher, let me say this. If you have made it this far, you are exactly the kind of listener these stories are for. If you have not already, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next chapter of this fight in the mountains. Now take a sip of your coffee or tea, settle in, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are and where you are listening from. 'Cause out here in 1885 Montana, time moved slow, but today it was running out fast. Elias Crow didn't stop until the ground began to tilt upward hard enough to burn the legs. His knees reminded him he was not 30 anymore, but he kept climbing anyway. May kept climbing beside him, breath shorter now, but steady, behind them. The thin ribbon of smoke drifted low through the trees. Vernon was not trying to burn the mountain. He was testing them, pushing, measuring how they moved. That meant he planned to keep pushing. By late afternoon, they reached the narrow path that only a man who lived up there would notice. It was nothing more than a break in the brush and a stretch of stone that left no clear tracks. Elias stepped onto it without hesitation. May followed, careful with her wrapped heel. You live up here, she asked. High enough, he said. She didn't complain about the climb again. That impressed him more than she knew. After another half hour, the trees opened just enough to reveal a small cabin tucked against rock and timber. Not pretty, not welcoming, but solid. Logs thick, windows narrow, roof low against wind. May let out a slow breath. "This is yours." Elias nodded. "Has been for a while." He walked the perimeter first before approaching the door. Checked the ground. No fresh prints. Only then did he unlock the door and motion her inside. The cabin was simple. Table, iron stove, 2 chairs, one narrow bed against the far wall, rifle rack above the fireplace, nothing extra. May stood in the center of the room, unsure where to place herself. Elias closed the door and barred it. "You sit," he said, pointing to the chair. He knelt by a wooden chest and pulled out clean cloth, a small jar of salve, and a kettle. He poured water and set it to heat. "You don't talk much," she said quietly. "I talk when needed." She almost smiled at that. He crouched in front of her and gently unwrapped her foot. The skin was raw but not torn deep. "That'll heal," he said. She nodded. He cleaned it without fuss and wrapped it tighter. "You ever been this far up?" he asked. She shook her head. "My sister didn't like the mountains." Elias glanced at the door. "Mountains don't like most folks either." Elias said it like the mountain had personally told him so. That earned a faint laugh. When he finished, he stood and walked to the fireplace. From a loose plank near the hearth, he pulled something small and silver. He hesitated only a second before setting it on the table. A badge, old, scratched, United States Marshal. May stared at it. "You weren't just a hunter." "No. Why'd you quit?" He leaned back against the wall. "Because sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing." He packed a pinch of tobacco, slow and familiar, like he was buying himself a second to not say more than he should. Then he looked past the window, not at the mountain, but at whatever he'd left behind in town years ago. She studied him carefully now. "You arrested Vernon." "Yes." "For stealing cattle." "For more than that." He didn't go into detail. He didn't need to. Men like Vernon didn't wake up cruel one morning. They practiced. May's face tightened. "He never forgave you." Elias shook his head. "Men like him don't forget who put them in a cell." And years ago, Elias had learned one hard truth. If a town went rotten, you did not ask it to fix itself. You sent word uphill to the men who did not owe that town a favor. Silence filled the cabin for a moment. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing pine against wood. May looked toward the window. "If he knows this is your place, he will," Elias said calmly. "And then he decides how badly he wants what you have." She swallowed. "It's not just the house," she said. "There's land, a claim, gold up near the river bend." Elias didn't look surprised. That explained the grease, the rope, the fire. Gold made men do worse than murder. "You're the heir?" he asked. She nodded. "My father filed it proper. My sister married Vernon after. If I'm gone, it all goes to him." There it was. Clean, simple, ugly. Elias walked to the small window and looked down the slope. From up here, he could see movement long before anyone reached the door. "That's why he couldn't just shoot you," Elias said. "He needs you guilty. Or gone by accident." May folded her hands together. "You could still send me away," she said. "Ride me to another town." He looked at her over his shoulder. "And let him hunt you again." She had no answer for that. The light outside shifted toward evening. Shadows stretched longer across the trees. Elias moved with quiet purpose now. He checked the rifle rack, counted cartridges, tested the back latch. Then he stepped outside once more, scanning the slope below. Nothing visible yet, but that meant little. Vernon would not rush a mountain cabin. He would surround it, wait for hunger, wait for fear. Elias stepped back inside and shut the door. He faced May fully now. "This place has one narrow path up," he said. "Loose rock on both sides. Anyone climbing fast will make noise." She listened carefully. "There's also a shallow ditch behind the woodpile," he added. "If you have to hide, you go there." Her eyes widened. You're planning for them to come tonight? I'm planning for them to try. He walked to the table and picked up the badge again. For a long moment he stared at it. Then he pinned it to the inside of his coat. Not where the world could see, but where he could feel it. May noticed. You said you left that life. I did. He looked toward the darkening window, but it seems it didn't leave me. Outside, somewhere lower on the mountain, a dog barked once. Short, sharp, not a wild sound, but a trained one. May stiffened. Elias didn't move right away. He listened. Counted heartbeats. There it was again. Closer. He met May's eyes. He didn't just bring fire this time. Elias said quietly, and then, from somewhere below the ridge, came the unmistakable sound of more than one horse climbing toward the cabin. The horses didn't rush the mountain. They climbed slow, careful. Men who rushed uphill died tired. Elias Crow stood in the center of his cabin and listened to the rhythm of hooves scraping stone. 3 horses. Maybe 4. At least 1 dog. May Harper stood near the hearth, pale but steady. They're coming straight up, she whispered. They think they own straight lines, Elias said. He moved quickly now, but not frantic. He handed May a small revolver from a shelf above the stove. Never fired one once, she said, at a tin can. Tonight it's not a tin can. Her fingers tightened around the grip. He stepped to the back wall and lifted a loose plank near the floor. Beneath it was a shallow trench he had dug years ago, not deep enough to bury a man. Deep enough to lie flat and avoid a bullet through the wall. If shooting start, he said. You get low. Not brave, low, she nodded. Outside, a man's voice carried faintly up the slope, confident, relaxed. Vernon Cade liked to sound relaxed. Elias stepped to the narrow front window and crouched. Through the trees he saw them at last, 4 riders, 1 lantern swinging low. 1 man leading a hound on a rope, and at the front, hat tilted just slightly back, sat Vernon. Even at a distance, he looked comfortable. That told Elias more than any threat would have. A comfortable man believed he was winning. They're spreading out, May said softly. She had moved beside him without him noticing. She was learning. Yes, he said. They don't plan to knock. The dog began to bark again, sharp and eager. It had caught scent. Not of grease this time, of people. Elias moved away from the window and lowered the lamp inside the cabin until the room fell dim. He didn't want them to see silhouettes. The first shot came without warning. Wood splintered near the door. May flinched. Elias did not. They're testing, he said calmly. Another shot. Higher this time, trying to find the height of a standing man. Elias dropped flat behind the trench. Down, he ordered. May slid beside him, pressing into the shallow groove. Her breathing was fast but controlled. Outside, Vernon's voice rose. You can't hide up there forever. Crow. So he knew. Of course he knew. Elias stayed silent. Silence forced a man to talk more than he meant to. You think that badge still protects you, Vernon called. It doesn't. May glanced at Elias. He kept his eyes on the wall. The next sound was different. A dull thud, then another. May's eyes widened. Are they throwing something? Elias inhaled slowly. Oil. He could smell it faintly even through pine and smoke. Stay down, he said. A moment later, flames licked against the outer wall. Not a wildfire. Not a raging blaze. Controlled. Placed. Vernon was not trying to burn the whole mountain, just the cabin, just enough heat to push them out. May's voice trembled despite herself. He'll burn us alive. No, Elias said quietly. He wants us running. Another bottle shattered against the roof. Fire spread along dry wood shingles. Smoke began to seep through cracks in the ceiling. Elias moved fast now. He crawled to the back corner and kicked open a narrow panel behind stacked firewood. Cold night air rushed in. This way, he said. May hesitated only a second before crawling through. The panel led to a narrow ditch he had dug long ago as a drainage trench. Tonight it was a lifeline. They slipped into it just as the front door burst inward under a heavy kick. Men shouted. Boots hit wood. Inside, flames crackled louder. May clutched the revolver but didn't fire. Elias guided her along the trench toward a thick stand of brush 10 yards behind the cabin. Smoke rolled upward. From the outside, it would look like the cabin was winning the fight. Elias paused behind the brush and listened. Inside, one of Vernon's men coughed. Another laughed. They ran. Someone said. Vernon's voice cut through the others. Search the back. Too late. Elias rose slowly and fired once. The lantern near the horses shattered. Darkness swallowed the clearing. Chaos followed. The dog barked wildly. A man cursed. Another fired blindly toward the trees. Elias grabbed May's arm and pulled her uphill. Not down. Up, away from the obvious escape route. Gunfire cracked behind them. Wood collapsed as part of the cabin roof gave way. May stumbled but kept moving. Her wrapped heel slipped once on loose stone. Elias steadied her without breaking stride. They'll circle, she panted. Yes. Then why are we climbing? Because they think we won't. A bullet struck rock near Elias's shoulder, showering sparks. Close, very close. Vernon was not guessing anymore. He was aiming. Elias ducked behind a thick pine and fired once toward a muzzle flash. A man cried out. Silence followed for 2 long seconds. In that silence, the fire below roared louder. May looked down the slope. The cabin was fully burning now, orange against black sky. That was your home, she said. Elias didn't look back. It was wood, he replied. A shot cracked from below. May lifted the revolver, waited for the shadow to commit, and fired once. The man dropped with a shout. May froze for half a second. Elias gave one short nod. Good. They climbed higher still until the trees thinned and the ground leveled into rock. From here, they could see the burning cabin clearly. Vernon stepped into the firelight below, face lit orange, scanning the slope. He was angry now. Anger made men reckless, but it also made them dangerous. Elias crouched behind stone and counted shapes in the dark. 3 still moving, maybe 4. The dog had gone silent. Either it was down, or they had brought another one. May swallowed hard. What now, she asked. Elias watched Vernon long and careful. Now, he said quietly, he stops pretending this is about papers, down below. Vernon lifted his rifle and aimed straight up toward where they hid, and this time, he didn't fire to scare them. Vernon Cade pulled the trigger. The rifle cracked through the night, and the bullet split stone inches above Elias Crow's head. No warning shot this time, no testing. He was done playing. Elias stayed low behind the rock, breath slow, eyes steady. Below them, the cabin burned hard now. Flames climbing through what had once been his roof. Sparks lifted into the dark sky like 1,000 dying stars. May lay flat beside him, revolver still in her hand. Her knuckles were white, but her voice, when it came, was clear. He's not leaving. No, Elias said. He isn't. Shots kept snapping bark and stone around them. Vernon's aim was steadier than the others, and Elias felt it in his gut. He pulled May left along the rock, low and slow, using shadow instead of speed. A muzzle flash blinked below. Elias fired once. The man dropped. 2 left besides Vernon. Maybe 3. The dog suddenly burst from brush to their right. Teeth bared, rope dragging behind it, May gasped. Elias didn't hesitate. 1 clean shot. The animal collapsed mid-stride. May swallowed hard. You didn't have to, she breathed. Yes, Elias said. They kept moving along the ridge until the slope behind them dipped sharply toward the Bitterroot River. Moonlight caught the water below, silver and restless. Elias studied the drop. Steep, loose gravel, dangerous. May followed his gaze. You're not thinking about jumping. Not jumping, he said. Sliding, another rifle crack from below forced the decision. Stone chipped near May's elbow. Too close. Elias grabbed her arm. We go now. They slid the gravel slope half-controlled, half falling, dust and rocks skittering under their feet. May cried out once when her wrapped foot twisted, but she kept moving. A bullet slapped the slope above them as Vernon fought for a line of sight. By the time they reached the riverbank, both were scraped and breathless. The Bitterroot moved fast in this stretch, swollen from late spring melt, cold. unforgiving. May stared at it. You said we stop running. We will, Elias said. Just not here. He didn't wait for fear to grow. He took her hand and stepped straight into the water. The cold hit like a hammer. May sucked in a sharp breath. The current shoved against their legs immediately. Elias angled them sideways, not fighting straight across. He moved the way a man moved who had crossed rivers with prisoners in chains and bullets in the air. Behind them, Vernon reached the top of the slope, his silhouette cut against firelight. He raised his rifle again. The shot cracked. Water exploded inches from Elias's shoulder. He didn't turn. Turning wasted balance. Keep your feet, he said through clenched teeth. The current pulled harder toward midstream. May slipped once, nearly going under. Elias hauled her upright. Her hair stuck to her face, eyes wide but locked on him. Another shot, this one farther off. Vernon's angle was worsening. The river curved, and then the current took them fully. Not drowning, but dragging. Elias let it carry them 10 yards downstream before forcing them toward a shallow shelf of rocks. They stumbled onto the far bank, soaked and shaking. For a moment neither spoke. Only the rush of water filled the night. Elias turned back toward the opposite bank. Vernon stood there, dark and rigid, unable to follow without losing his own footing. The fire behind him burned lower now. Smoke drifted across the slope. Even from this distance, Elias could feel the anger in the way Vernon held his rifle. He won't stop, May said quietly. No, Elias agreed, and the river won't stop him forever. He scanned upstream and down, no easy crossing nearby, but Vernon knew these mountains too. There was a shallow bend upstream, and a man like him would know it, which meant this was not escape, just distance. May hugged herself against the cold. Her bare foot trembled against stone. You lost your cabin, she said softly. Elias looked back once more at the faint glow on the ridge. It was time, he said. That was only half true. He had built that place with his own hands, but wood could burn. People were harder to rebuild. He stepped closer to her. We can't stay here. She nodded. Where do we go? He looked downriver toward the faint outline of Missoula far beyond the trees. If he wants papers signed, Elias said, he'll want witnesses who look official. Her expression tightened. Town? Yes. May hesitated. The deputy is his man. I know, and others might be too. I know that as well. The river roared behind them. Above, clouds drifted across the moon, dimming the night. For a long moment, it was just the two of them on that bank. Wet, cold, alive. Then from upstream came the faint but unmistakable sound of another horse splashing into water. Elias turned his head slowly. Vernon had not waited for morning, and this time he was crossing. The splash upstream came again, not clumsy, not panicked, measured. Vernon Cade was bringing his horse into the Bitterroot at a slower angle, choosing a better crossing than rage had allowed him before. Elias Crow didn't waste another second watching. He's learning, May said quietly. He always did. Elias replied. He scanned the far bank. Dark timber, thick brush, no clear trail. Good. Up, he said. They moved along the riverbank at a sharp angle, keeping low where the brush grew dense. May's wet skirt clung to her legs, her wrapped foot leaving faint marks in mud. But the current had already erased most sign of where they came out. Behind them, water churned as Vernon forced his horse forward. He would lose time in the crossing, but not enough. Elias angled them toward a shallow bend where the bank rose into scrub and then flattened toward open ground. Beyond that lay the road that led to Missoula. He didn't like that road. Roads meant eyes, but the woods meant rifles in the dark. They reached the scrub line just as a shot cracked from across the water. Too far, too rushed. Vernon was firing more from anger now than precision. Keep moving, Elias said. May nodded, breath tight. They climbed through brush until the river noise faded behind them. The sky had begun to pale at the edges. Dawn was coming, and dawn meant witnesses. By the time they reached the road, both were soaked, muddy, and exhausted. A wagon track cut through the earth toward town. Elias paused and listened. No riders in immediate pursuit. Vernon would regroup. He would not ride straight into town shooting. He was smarter than that. You still want to go there, May asked. Yes. He owns half of it. Then we'll walk into the half he doesn't. That earned the smallest flicker of a smile from her. They walked side by side down the road as the first light crept over the hills. Missoula came into view slowly. Wooden storefronts, a church steeple, the outline of the bank, smoke rising from morning stoves, normal life beginning. It almost looked peaceful. That was the lie of towns. People opened doors not knowing trouble was already walking toward them. At the edge of town, Elias slowed. From here, he said quietly, you don't look afraid. She lifted her chin. I'm not. That's good. But don't look hunted. They stepped onto the main street just as a shopkeeper swept dust from his doorway. A couple of men outside the saloon glanced at him, taking in wet clothes and tired faces. Recognition flickered in one pair of eyes. May noticed it too. Word travels fast, she murmured. Yes, Elias said. And sometimes it was pushed. They head straight toward the bank. If Vernon wanted papers signed, that was the place. As they approached, the heavy door opened and Deputy Amos Pike stepped out. Hat low, hand resting near his holster. He saw May first, then Elias. His jaw tightened. Well, Pike said evenly. Didn't expect to see you walking free. May's spine stiffened. I haven't done anything, she said. Pike gave a humorless smile. That's not what I've been told. Elias stepped half a pace forward, not aggressive, not yielding. What have you been told? He asked calmly. That she murdered her sister, Pike replied, and fled. May's breath caught. But she didn't speak again. Elias studied Pike carefully. There was no hesitation in the deputy's tone. No doubt. Which meant someone had already planted the story. How long you been wearing that badge? Pike Elias asked. The deputy's eyes narrowed slightly. Long enough. Long enough to know accusations ain't convictions. A few townsfolk had slowed their steps nearby, listening without appearing to. Pike shifted his weight. This ain't your concern, Crow. It became my concern when someone tried to feed her to a bear. Elias said quietly. A murmur rippled through the small gathering. Pike's expression hardened. You making wild claims now, I'm stating facts, Elias replied. He reached into his coat slowly. Not for a weapon, for the coiled rope he had taken from the tree. He held it up just enough for Pike to see the knot. Recognized that hitch. Pike's eyes flicked to it, then away. Before he could answer, another voice drifted from behind the bank door. Smooth, confident. That's enough talk for the street. Judge Hollis Rourke stepped out into the morning light. Clean coat, polished boots. A man who never dirtied his hands yet somehow always held power. He looked at May with something close to pity. Miss Harper, the judge said gently, this has gone far enough. May's hands curled at her sides. You know the truth, she said. Rourke's smile didn't reach his eyes. I know what the law will accept. Elias watched the exchange carefully. This was bigger than Vernon alone. Much bigger. Elias had a feeling the old message he sent long ago might finally have legs. Behind them, the sound of hooves echoed faintly at the far end of town. Not hurried. Not chaotic. Controlled. Elias didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. Vernon had arrived, and this time he was not coming as a hunter in the woods. He was coming as a man who believed the whole town stood behind him. Elias finally shifted his gaze down the street. Vernon Cade rode in slow, calm, and smiling. And he was not alone. Vernon Cade rode into Missoula like a man arriving for church, not a man who had burned a cabin before sunrise. He swung down from the saddle slow and easy, boots clean, coat brushed, rifle resting calm across his shoulder. Two riders followed behind him, not wild-looking men, not drifters. Local faces, that was the part that mattered. Elias Crow didn't move. May stood beside him, chin high, though Elias could feel the tension in the air between them like a wire pulled tight. Vernon tipped his hat slightly toward the judge. Morning, Your Honor, he said. Judge Rourke inclined his head as if greeting a respectable citizen. Mr. Cade. Deputy Pike shifted a little closer to May. Vernon's eyes finally landed on her. There was no surprise there. Only calculation. You look tired, he said lightly. Been running. May didn't answer. Elias stepped half a pace forward. She was tied to a tree with grease on her boot. Elias said calmly, "That's running enough." A few townsfolk exchanged uneasy looks. Vernon sighed like a man burdened by foolishness. "Crow," he said, almost amused. "You've always liked a dramatic story." He turned to the small gathering. "My wife died last week," he said, voice lowering, just enough to sound sincere, "and now her sister vanishes in the night." He shook his head slowly. Grief does strange things to people. Judge Rourke folded his hands in front of him. "Miss Harper," he said smoothly, "if you have something to say in your defense, now would be the time." Defense. The word hung heavy. May swallowed once. "I didn't kill my sister," she said, steady but not loud, "and he tried to have me killed." A murmur rolled through the street. Vernon let out a soft laugh. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth," she said. Deputy Pike's hand hovered near his holster now. Elias noticed. So did Vernon. And Vernon smiled slightly. "Perhaps we should take this inside," the judge suggested. No need for a spectacle. Inside meant closed doors. Closed doors meant no witnesses who mattered. Elias weighed the street carefully. Men watching from the saloon porch. A shopkeeper holding a broom mid-sweep. Two older ranchers standing near the hitching post. Not cowards, just cautious. He spoke quietly, but clear enough for them to hear. "If she goes inside without counsel," Elias said, "it won't be law. It'll be paperwork dressed up as law." Judge Rourke's smile thinned. "You are no longer an officer of the court, Mr. Crow." "No," Elias agreed, "but I remember how one works." Vernon's patience began to slip at the edges. "You always did think you were better than the rest of us," he said. "I think rope and grease speak for themselves," Elias replied. Vernon's eyes flicked briefly to the coiled rope still hanging from Elias's hand. That was the first crack in his calm. Small, but real. Judge Rourke stepped forward. "Deputy," he said smoothly, "escort Miss Harper into the bank. We will sort this properly." Pike reached for May's arm. Elias moved at the same moment, not drawing his weapon, just placing himself between them. "No one touches her," he said quietly. For a second, the street held its breath. Then the sound came, a wagon rolling up from the far end. Old wheel, heavy load. The driver reined in hard when he saw the gathering. It was Mr. Callahan, the bank clerk. An older man with careful eyes. He looked from Vernon to May, then to Elias. His gaze lingered on the rope, and something changed in his expression. "You best not rush this," Callahan said slowly. "There's documents that need reviewing." Vernon stiffened. Judge Rourke shot him a sharp look. Barely visible, but sharp enough. Elias noticed that too. There was tension between those two, not equal partners, more like one man pulling strings and another thinking he held them. May leaned slightly toward Elias. "He's nervous," she whispered. "Yes," Elias said under his breath, "but not about you." Vernon stepped forward again, voice harder now. "She's coming inside," he said. "And if she refuses," Elias asked calmly. Deputy Pike shifted again. His thumb brushed the strap of his holster. Too many hands were near guns now. Too many eyes were watching. Vernon exhaled slowly, then changed tone. "All right," he said. "We do this simple." He turned to the crowd. "If she's innocent, she won't mind signing a statement swearing it, right here, in front of witnesses." That sounded fair. That was the trick. May looked at Elias. He understood instantly. A signed statement could be twisted. Words changed later. Witnesses coached. "That statement already written?" Elias asked. Vernon didn't answer directly. Judge Rourke did. "For efficiency." Yes, there it was. Efficiency. Elias felt the old weight of the badge against his coat. This was not about justice, and this was about control. He looked around the street again. Faces uncertain. Men who didn't want trouble. Men who also didn't want to be fools. May straightened. "I'll sign nothing I haven't read," she said clearly. Vernon's jaw tightened. "And if I don't allow it," he said softly. That was the moment the mask slipped. Not for the whole town, but for Elias. He saw it now. This was not just a greedy husband. This was a man backed by something larger, something that believed the town would fall in line. Elias met Vernon's stare. "You don't get to allow anything," he said quietly. Behind them, the heavy bank door creaked open wider, and from the dark interior, A second voice spoke, calm, confident. Actually, the voice said, in this town, he does. The voice came from the bank doorway, calm as Sunday. Actually, in this town, he does. A man stepped into the light behind Judge Hollis Rourke, older than the deputy, dressed neat, holding a stack of papers like they were a weapon. It was the bank's senior manager, Mr. Callahan's boss, a man who looked like he slept in a clean shirt and never missed a payment. He nodded once to Vernon Cade, then to the judge, as if the order of respect was already decided. May Harper felt her stomach tighten. Elias Crow didn't flinch. He watched the manager's hands. Paper could be more dangerous than a pistol when the wrong people signed it. Judge Rourke spoke softly, like he was offering mercy. Miss Harper, you can end this in 5 minutes. Vernon's smile widened. He looked at the townsfolk and spread his hands. I don't want trouble, he said. I want peace. She signs, we all go home. Elias turned his head slightly, just enough to catch the faces around them. Men over 40, work hard and careful with their opinions. They wanted peace too. Most people did. That was how men like Vernon bought time. May looked at Elias as if asking permission to panic. Elias gave her none. He spoke to the crowd instead, voice plain and steady. You all know what a fair deal looks like. He said, it don't happen with a deputy gripping a girl's arm and a judge waiting behind a locked door. Deputy Amos Pike stiffened. Watch your mouth, Pike warned. Elias kept his tone even. I'm watching hands, he said. That's what keeps a man alive. Judge Rourke's patience thinned. Deputy, he said, take her inside. Pike reached for May again. This time May stepped back on her own, but her heel slipped in the dust. Elias caught her elbow, not pulling her close, just keeping her on her feet. That small act changed the street. A few men shifted their stance, a few eyes narrowed. Not because they loved May, because they recognized control when they saw it. Vernon noticed the change, too. He took one slow step forward. Elias, he said, using Crow's first name now like an old friend. You want to play hero? Fine, but you can't win this. Elias looked at him. I'm not trying to win, he said. I'm trying to keep her alive long enough for the truth to speak. Vernon's eyes flicked to May, then to the judge, then back to Elias. He made a small, almost invisible nod. Deputy Pike moved his hand closer to his gun. The two riders behind Vernon shifted in their saddles. Elias felt the street tighten again. Trouble was deciding to take a shape. Mr. Callahan, the clerk, stepped forward half a pace, voice careful. Your Honor, he said, I'd like to review the claim papers before anyone signs anything. Just to be safe. Judge Rourke turned his head slowly. That will not be necessary, he said. Callahan swallowed. It's routine, he insisted. Her father filed it proper. We should confirm. Rourke smiled without warmth. Routine is what I say it is. Elias caught that. May caught it too. And the crowd heard it, even if they pretended not to. Vernon exhaled like a man tired of pretending. All right, he said. We do it a simpler way. He raised his voice so the whole street could hear. May Harper's under arrest for the murder of my wife. She'll be taken into custody. Anyone interfering will be treated as an accomplice. A few people stepped back. Not cowardice, just the instinct to avoid being crushed between powerful men. May's throat tightened. She was my sister, she said, voice shaking but firm. He's lying. Vernon's expression didn't change. Lying was easy when you owned the room. Elias shifted his weight slightly, placing himself between May and the deputy. He didn't draw his gun, not yet. Drawing first made you the villain in a town looking for an excuse. He looked at Judge Rourke. You've got no warrant, Elias said. Rourke's voice stayed smooth. The deputy has probable cause. Elias nodded once. That's a fancy way to say you don't need proof. The judge's eyes hardened. Enough, he said. Deputy Pike made his move. He grabbed May's wrist. May jerked back and raised the revolver she'd kept hidden under her shawl. Not to shoot, just to stop the grab. The sight of it snapped the street like a rope pulled too far. Pike drew his gun. One of Vernon's riders drew too. A man on the saloon porch shouted for everyone to get down. Elias moved at the same moment, fast and sure. He hit Pike's gun hand sideways. throwing the barrel offline. The shot that fired went into the dirt. People screamed, not from blood, from fear. Fear spread faster than bullets. Elias shoved May behind the water trough and crouched with her. "Stay low," he said. Vernon's rider fired again. Wood splintered on a post. Elias returned one shot, aimed not to kill but to stop. The rider's hat flew off and the man dropped behind his saddle. Suddenly less brave, Vernon stepped back, anger finally breaking through his calm. "Shoot him," he snapped. Judge Rourke didn't shout. He simply raised his hand, and two men near the bank door lifted rifles from under coats like they had been waiting all morning. That was the truth of Missoula. It was organized. Elias leaned close to May. "This is what he wanted," he said. May's eyes were wet, but her voice stayed steady. "He's going to take me inside, not if we keep breathing," Elias said. He glanced over the trough. Vernon was moving sideways, using the hitching posts for cover, trying to angle around. Elias didn't chase him. Chasing got you shot. He fired once toward the bank rifles, forcing them to duck. Then he grabbed the coiled rope from earlier and tossed it across the street, snagging the leg of a hitching post. A horse spooked and reared, yanking the post just enough to break the line of sight for a heartbeat. In that heartbeat, Elias moved. He ran low, pulled May with him, and slid behind a stack of feed sacks near the general store. May's breathing was hard now. "Elias," she whispered, "we can't win this." Elias looked at her, face calm in the middle of noise. "We don't need to win," he said. "We need one thing to change." "What thing?" He nodded toward Judge Rourke. "A man like that don't step into sunlight unless he thinks he can't be touched." Gunfire cracked again. A window shattered. "Glosol." The crowd scattered behind barrels and doorways. Vernon's voice rose, sharp and ugly. "Bring her out, now!" Elias looked down the street and saw it. At the far end, through the moving dust, a rider came in fast, straight from the north road, like he'd been riding hard for hours. The rider wore a plain coat and carried a long rifle across the saddle, and he headed straight for the bank. Elias narrowed his eyes. He didn't know that man, but he knew one thing. The man was not slowing down. And Vernon Cade, seeing him too, reached calmly toward his sleeve as if he had saved something small for the exact moment Elias let his guard down. The rider didn't slow down. He rode straight through the dust and gun smoke like a man who had chosen his side before he reached town. Vernon Cade saw him. So did Judge Rourke. And in that single second of distraction, the careful balance of Missoula shifted. Elias Crow saw Vernon's hand move toward his sleeve. Small motion, hidden motion, the kind a man saved for the last card in the deck. Elias didn't hesitate. He stepped out from behind the feed sacks and fired once, not at Vernon's chest, at his arm. The shot hit. Vernon's sleeve snapped back, and a small pistol dropped into the dirt. A Derringer, the kind meant for betrayal at close range. The street gasped as one. Now everyone saw it. Not rumor, not accusation. A hidden gun in a man who claimed to want peace. The new rider pulled up hard near the bank door. He was not a stranger after all. He wore a federal badge pinned open on his coat. Not random, not lucky. Someone had answered a message, not polished, not flashy, real. He dismounted without hurry and spoke loud enough for the whole street. "Drop the rifles." The older ranchers on the porch straightened. Hands eased away from belts. Eyes locked on the judge instead of the girl. The tone was not angry. It was final. Deputy Pike froze. The two men by the bank door lowered their guns first. Judge Rourke's face drained of color. Just slightly. Enough for Elias to notice. Vernon clutched his bleeding arm, rage and disbelief fighting in his eyes. "This is a mistake," he snapped. The federal officer looked at the dropped Derringer in the dust. "Looks like a habit," he replied. Silence rolled across the street like wind across dry grass. May stepped out from behind the trough slowly, not hiding anymore, not running. The crowd was no longer leaning away. They were watching closely. Men over 40 know the difference between fear and truth. They had just seen the difference. Elias lowered his rifle but didn't relax. He watched Judge Rourke. Power does not collapse in one loud moment. It erodes piece by piece. The federal officer turned to May. "Miss Harper," he said calmly, "is it true you were tied in the mountains?" "Yes," she answered. And the man who did it is here. She looked straight at Vernon. Yes. The officer nodded once. Then he looked at the crowd. If anyone here wants to explain why a grieving husband carries a hidden pistol to a peaceful conversation, now would be the time. No one spoke, not because they were afraid, because they understood the game had changed. Deputy Pike stepped back slowly. Judge Rourke straightened his coat, but said nothing. And Vernon Cade, for the first time since this began, looked smaller than the mountain he tried to control. Elias felt the weight of the old badge against his coat. He had not pinned it outside. He had not needed to. Sometimes you do not win by drawing first. You win by standing long enough for truth to catch up. May moved closer to him. Her voice was quiet. It's over. Elias looked at the rising sun over Missoula. No, he said gently. It's beginning. Because justice does not end with one man bleeding in the dirt. It begins when people decide not to look away. And that, right there, is where this story stops being about 1885. It becomes about us. I want to step out of the dust for a moment and speak to you plainly. There are times in life when walking away feels easier. When you see something wrong and you tell yourself it is not your concern. Elias could have left May hanging in that tree. No one would have blamed him. He had already paid his price once for standing against men with power, but he didn't walk away. And I have learned something in my own life from stories like this. If you let fear make your decisions long enough, you start calling it wisdom. If you stay silent long enough, you start calling it peace. And that's the lie. It is surrender. Every one of us has stood at a moment where helping meant risk, where speaking meant trouble, where doing the right thing didn't promise comfort. So I ask you this, what rope are you pretending not to see? What small wrong have you convinced yourself is not your fight? What fear are you calling common sense? May didn't win because she was stronger. She won because she refused to sign her own lie. Elias didn't win because he was faster. He won because he stayed steady when pressure came. Life will test you in quieter ways than gunfire. It will test you in conversations, in compromises, in the moments where no one is watching, and that is where character is built. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you of something you needed to hear, take a second to like this video. It helps more than you think, and if you believe stories about courage and responsibility and standing your ground still matter, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one, because we are not just telling old tales here. We are reminding ourselves what kind of people we want to be. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand alone when it would have been easier to step aside? What did you choose? And if you're facing something right now, something that feels unfair or heavy, what would it look like to face it steady instead of afraid? Elias Crow once left the law because he was tired, but when the moment returned, he didn't hide from it. Maybe that is the lesson. You do not need to go looking for war, but when the right fight finds you, meet it standing, because in the end, mountains remember who stood their ground. Mountains remember, and so do good men.